The call arrived at 6:47 a.m., a time when the world feels thin and fragile. In Toronto, January mornings don't break, they simply bleed from a bruised purple into a heavy, suffocating gray. I was standing in my kitchen, the tiles cold beneath my feet, watching a silent gale of snow erase the fence line in my backyard. I had a mug of coffee in my hand, my second, and the steam was the only thing in the room that felt alive. When the phone buzzed on the granite counter, the name Glenn seemed to glow with a strange, predatory intensity. We hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. The last time we stood in the same room, we were in the sterile, lemon-scented hallway of the Maple Grove Care Center, arguing in hushed, angry tones about the quality of Mom's specialized care. Glenn had been distant, his eyes darting to his gold watch every 30 seconds, acting as though our mother's decline was a scheduled inconvenience. "Douglas," Glenn said when I answered. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He used a voice I'd heard him use at funerals for distant cousins, a practiced, hollow baritone meant to convey gravity while masking a total lack of empathy. "I have some difficult news. Mom passed away last night, peacefully, in her sleep." The mug in my hand felt suddenly like it weighed 50 pounds. My heart didn't race, it stopped, a cold stone in my chest. "What? When?" "Glenn, I spoke to the head nurse yesterday afternoon. She said Mom had a bit of a cough, but she was stable." "Things happen fast at 85, Doug. You know that," he said, his tone shifting with clinical efficiency. The fake grief was already receding, replaced with the shark-like business persona that had made him a top-tier real estate closer in North York. "The funeral is Friday. I've already contacted Thornhill Funeral Home. They're handling the body and the service. I didn't want to burden you with the logistics, considering how Catherine's passing took such a toll on you." The mention of my late wife felt like a slap. It was a tactical strike, reminding me of my own grief to keep me compliant. "But Friday? That's only 3 days away," I stammered. "I need to call Emma. I need to get to the home and see her. I need to—" "There's no need for that," Glenn interrupted, his voice hardening. The fake grief was already receding, replaced with the shark-like business persona that had made him a top-tier real estate closer in North York. "The funeral is Friday. I've already contacted Thornhill Funeral Home. They're handling the body and the service. I didn't want to burden you with the logistics, considering how Catherine's passing took such a toll on you." The mention of my late wife felt like a slap. It was a tactical strike, reminding me of my own grief to keep me compliant. "But Friday? That's only 3 days away," I stammered. "I need to call Emma. I need to get to the home and see her. I need to—" "There's no need for that," Glenn interrupted, his voice hardening. It was her wish to move quickly. "And Douglas, while I have you, I've already reviewed the final version of the will with her attorney. Well, her current attorney. Everything goes to me. The house in Richmond Hill, the Muskoka cottage, the investment portfolios. All of it. She felt that because of my business challenges, I needed the supports more than a retired engineer with a pension. The will is ironclad. Don't even think about contesting it. It would just be a waste of the money you do have." The line clicked. He was gone. I stood there, the silence of the kitchen magnifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. My mother was supposedly dead, and her baby boy had spent exactly 60 seconds informing me of her passing before pivoting to a warning about her assets. It was too fast. It was too clean. As a civil engineer, I spent my life looking for structural flaws, the cracks in the foundation that suggest the whole building is about to give way. This wasn't just a crack, it was a sinkhole.
The squeeze of my mother's hand changed everything. It transformed me from a man drowning in grief into a man focused on a mission. As I left Maple Grove that evening, I ran into Dr. James Whitmore in the parking lot. He was getting into a sleek European sedan that Mom's medical fees had likely helped finance. "Douglas," he said, smoothing his silk tie. "Glenn told me the news. My deepest condolences. It's a mercy, really. Her quality of life was, well, you saw it. I looked him in the eye, my hands balled into fists inside my coat pockets. Yes, doctor, it's amazing how fast she went, almost as if she had help. His smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned as cold as the ice on the pavement. Nature is rarely kind to the elderly. I suggest you focus on the arrangements. Glenn is quite ahead of the curve on that front. I drove home, my mind racing. I wasn't just fighting for an inheritance, I was fighting for a life. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in my darkened living room, the blueprints of my mother's estate spread out like a battle map. At 11:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a blocked number. Douglas? The voice was a dry rasp, barely a thread of sound, but it was her. It wasn't the vacant mumble of the woman in the armchair. It was the voice of the woman who had corrected my grammar for 20 years. "Mom? My God, Mom, where are you?" "I'm in my room," she whispered. "I'm using a burner phone. One of the night cleaners, a girl named Maria, whose mother I used to help with literacy classes, she sneaked it to me. I don't have much time, Douglas. The night nurse comes at midnight with the sedative cocktail." "Mom, Glenn told me you were dead. He's holding a funeral on Friday." I heard a faint, bitter laugh on the other end. "I know. He told me during our drive today. He took me out to the country, Douglas. He sat me in that car and told me I was a burden. He told me that by Friday I'd be at rest and he'd have the signature he needed on the Muskoka deed. He thinks I'm too far gone to understand. He's been drugging my tea, but for the last 3 days I've been spitting the pills into the potted plants. We're coming for you, Mom. I have a lawyer, a PI, and the police are being briefed." "No," she said, her voice gaining a sudden fierce clarity. "If the police come now, he'll claim a misunderstanding. He'll hide behind his POA. He'll say I'm delusional. We have to let him walk into his own trap. He's booked the funeral at 2 p.m. on Friday. He wants to cremate an empty casket and declare me legally dead before I ever leave this room. We're going to give him his funeral, Douglas, but I'm going to be the one to deliver the eulogy." The next 48 hours were a masterpiece of covert engineering. Sarah Mitchell, the PI, worked with Maria, the cleaner, to install a pinhole camera in Mom's room. On Thursday night, we hit pay dirt. I sat with 2 detectives in a parked van outside Maple Grove, watching a tablet screen. Glenn entered Mom's room at 9 p.m. He didn't look like a son. He looked like a predator. He pulled a pre-filled syringe from his pocket, something he'd clearly obtained from Whitmore. "Last one, Mom," Glenn whispered to the seemingly sleeping woman. "Once you're gone, the debt goes away. The house sells. I can finally breathe again. It's not personal. It's just survival." He moved to inject her, but a nurse, actually an undercover officer, knocked on the door to perform a routine check. Glenn cursed, hid the syringe in a drawer, and slipped out. "We have enough for the syringe, but the funeral is the play for the fraud and the estate theft. We wait for Friday." Friday arrived with a blinding whiteout blizzard. The Thornhill Funeral Home was an island of somber light in the storm. Glenn had spared no expense, with Mom's money. The foyer was filled with expensive lilies, their scent cloying and thick. A large gold-framed portrait of Mom stood by the entrance, showing her 20 years younger and radiant. I sat in the front row, Emma beside me. She had flown in that morning, her eyes red from crying, half for the grandmother she thought she'd lost, and half in fury at the uncle who had tried to steal her. Glenn sat across the aisle. He wore a bespoke black suit and a face of practiced tragic dignity. He occasionally leaned over to whisper to Patricia, who looked terrified. She knew something was wrong, but she was too deep in his debt to speak. At 2:10 p.m., Glenn stood up. He walked to the podium with the confidence of a man who had just closed the biggest deal of his life. "We are here to celebrate Helen Margaret Harrison, a teacher, a mother, a woman who in her final moments of clarity looked to me for guidance. She knew that I would protect her legacy. She told me in her final moments of clarity that she wanted her home and her investments to be handled with the care only I could provide. He paused, a fake tear glistening in the corner of his eye. She's at peace now. No more fog, no more confusion. I stood up. The silence that followed was absolute. That's a beautiful story, Glenn, except for the part where you're currently trying to cremate an empty box while our mother is still breathing. The room erupted in whispers. Glenn's face went from pale to a sickly mottled purple. Douglas, you're having a breakdown. Sit down. This is grief talking. It's not grief, I said, pointing to the back of the room. It's a witness. The heavy oak doors of the chapel swung open, the wind howled into the foyer, bringing a swirl of snow with it, and there, framed by the light, was Helen Harrison. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She was standing tall, supported by a cane, flanked by Robert Chen and 2 uniformed officers. She walked down the aisle with a terrifying rhythmic precision. People began to scream. A cousin in the 3rd row fainted. To them, it was a ghost. To Glenn, it was the end of the world. Mom reached the front. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked directly at Glenn. The will you're so fond of, Glenn, I revoked it 10 months ago, she said, her voice echoing with the authority of the schoolteacher she had always been. I moved my assets into an irrevocable trust for Douglas and Emma. You've spent the last 8 months stealing from a decoy account I set up just to see how far you would go. And you went all the way to a syringe in the dark. Glenn tried to scramble off the stage, but the officers were already there. They tackled him in front of the empty casket. The solemn service collapsed into a scene of chaotic justice. I'm your son, he shrieked as they pressed his face into the carpet. You stopped being my son when you started measuring me for a coffin while I was still having my tea. Mom's voice was steady and cold. The legal aftermath was a hurricane. Glenn was charged with attempted murder, grand larceny, and elder abuse. Dr. Whitmore was arrested within the hour. He turned state evidence against Glenn in a desperate attempt to save his own skin, but the College of Physicians stripped his license regardless. Glenn eventually took a plea deal, 12 years in a federal facility. Patricia left him, taking what little remained of their personal assets. But the real story happened at the Muskoka cottage that following summer. Mom and I sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and copper. Emma was down by the water, identifying local fish for a research project. I knew you'd come for me, Douglas, Mom said, sipping her tea, unmedicated and hot. I knew you were the one who would look for the truth. I'm an engineer, Mom, I said, squeezing her hand. I don't like it when things don't add up. She smiled, and for the first time in a year, the fog was truly gone. She had turned her betrayal into a legacy, using the recovered funds to build a center for elder advocacy. As the loons began their evening call, I realized that Glenn had been wrong about one thing. He thought our mother was an asset to be liquidated. He forgot that she was the architect of our family, and an architect always knows where the secret doors are. We sat in the deepening silence, a family not bound by blood alone, but by the fierce, unyielding choice to protect one another. The storm had passed, and for the first time in a